When you read a novel, what draws you in are the characters, the fictional people. What's really interesting is how fictional people are like or not like real human beings. To find out what it is about Oliver Twist or Scrooge or Lady Deathlock, it's important to also look at the people around Oliver, to look at the other characters in A Christmas Carol, or to look at the whole cast in Bleak House. Even better is to look at lots of other fictional people in novels by other authors. And once you start talking about a lot of characters, a lot of novels, a lot of texts, then your problem really becomes more like a data science problem. Now, for an author like Charles Dickens, you might wonder what computational methods can help us find that generations of literary critics haven't discussed yet. To address this question, together with a group of colleagues, we've developed the web application CLiC. CLiC is very much a developing resource. So at present there are about 150 books in CLiC and about 16 million words. There are not just texts by Dickens, there's also George Eliot, Oscar Wilde, Mary Braddon, Elizabeth Gaskell and others. When you read a text on the page, it's very easy for you to spot striking words or to find repetitions within a short space of text. What is much more difficult is to see whether there are any subtle patterns, whether there are any repetitions that are spaced out a lot more. And this is where the CLiC application has assisted in gaining major new insights into fiction. One is particularly around the way in which fictional characters speak to one another. So we can find phrases like, it seems to me that, I don't know what. So phrases that are not just in one novel, that are not particular to a specific character, but that are common across novels, that are common in the language in general and are also used by us as readers. So such phrases are a lot more subtle than Scrooge saying humbug or Mr. Snagsby talking about not to put too fine a point upon it. It's corpus linguistic methods that help us identify such phrases. Another important area of communication is body language. Novels are such a rich source of body language because the narrator has to describe for the reader what isn't there to see, but it still needs to be visualized. And here again, CLiC can help us find patterns of body language descriptions in the language. If you look at a text like Hard Times, for instance, any reader will spot that there's Mr. Bounderby and he tends to have his hands in his pockets, because in Hard Times, hands are also used to refer to the factory people, so body language has a very specific meaning. But there are a lot of people in fiction who have their hands occasionally in their pockets, and this is an important pointer to much more historical or social patterns that are less direct, more subtle to find when you just read the text. Another example is the phrase, with his back to the fire. That's a particular phrase that's used a lot in the 19th century, but is mainly used for men. It's men with their back to the fire. This is not a pose for women. This is a pose that has to do with power, and it's also to do with fashion again, because long skirts could easily catch fire, and long skirts were a known fire hazard in the 19th century. Once we start looking at such more subtle general patterns, we're in a much better position to really look at gendered behavior, structures of fictional society, stereotypes, and then we can much better assess the relationship between people in fiction, fictional worlds, and the real world. We're also much better able to contextualize individual novels, so we can say something about particular writing styles. There's still Dickens' very specific style, but corpus linguistic methods help us to get a much more nuanced view of what Dickens does with the language and what makes his writing unique. By developing the CLiC web application, we are aiming to provide analytical tools that are easy to use and can also be brought into the literature classroom. In this way, they can support teachers, but they can also generate new insight and new interest into classic texts. By combining the study of literature and study of fiction with computational methods, we are able to demonstrate that traditional divisions between disciplines are much less hard and fast than we'd like to believe. A lot of big data that we talk about so much today is language data. Corpus linguistics, as the data science of language studies, makes an important contribution, a humanities contribution to data science.